Hi everyone, thank you, and I'd like to thank our panel for the time that they've taken, not only to sit on the panel today. Can you hear me all? Yes, yes. And also for the preparation that they've had in this panel. I've interviewed them all and questioned them extensively, so there's a lot of investment in time here. As we make our way through the discussion, firstly I'd like to thank... It's not on? It's on. You can hear? Yep. Yep, good. Got thumbs up from the back, that's great. I'd like to thank Minister King, Minister Michael, because they gave a great overview and context of critical minerals, which means that we can get straight to our favourite subject, which is people and future people. So we're going to be talking about the future geoscientists of Australia and what we need to do and what we'd like to see in these future geoscientists. What do we think as being necessary to bring to the table to shape our future geoscientists? And we have an amazing panel here. And I'll introduce everybody one by one as we go through the questions rather than have 4 or 5 bios in a row and keep you all on track. Of course, I would like to start with my friend Professor Marco Fiorentini, who we know is a professor behind the centre and the driver, and he'll talk a little bit about the name of the centre, but I'll just introduce Marco first. He's the director of the ARC Centre in Critical Resources for the Future and a professor at UWA, obviously. He is an expert in igneous. I'm from space. I manage the International Space Centre, so any geological terms I get wrong, just gloss over them. Igneous petrology and isotopic geochemistry. Thank you for that, Mike. He's led numerous industry-funded research initiatives and held key positions, including the senior research leader at the Centre for Exploration Targeting, which we're all very familiar with. His research integrates fundamental science with applied techniques to explore metal cycles and mineral system genesis and addresses critical challenges in mineral exploration. And I'll come back to that piece about applied versus fundamental in a little bit. Now, we're used to hearing about critical minerals and we're used to hearing about rare earth. Marco, can you please explain what a critical resource is?
Yes, I mean, when we, as I mentioned in the introduction before, this is the culmination of the work of many of us. And when we were actually discussing about pitching this idea to the Australian Research Council, critical is obviously a buzzword that is used very often nowadays. And we refer to critical metals, critical minerals. But when we decided to go for critical resources, what we had in mind was to really emphasize the human aspect behind the training center. In the way we are aware that in order to find this ore deposit of the future, we need to change the way we go about training our geoscientists. And so the criticality of the future workforce is what is pivotal to the new center that is being launched today. And the criticality in our understanding comes from having the center focusing on those boundaries between disciplines and focusing on training our critical future workforce on skills and know-hows that transgress the full value chain. So we're going to focus on how to shape the future workforce from that point of view. So the criticality stands in that aspect more than the commodity of the month.
So the resources are human, and we're talking about skilling up our humans for the future here.
Exactly.
You talked a little bit there about those different, not just geoscience, but you talked about those other industries. What are we hoping to incorporate here?
Well, the idea here is that the geoscience can be really a platform where a lot of the STEM disciplines can come together. You name the physics, the maths, the chemistry. They can all come together because, the planet is shaped by physical and chemical processes that need to be quantified and understood with a wide range of tools. It's not, there is no one specific silver bullet that allows us to understand everything. So when we try and think about the geoscientists of the future will have to understand how the data that they acquire at any specific stage could actually have a bearing on how we go about characterizing the deposits or how we go about processing them, but also how about we are going to minimize waste production, repurpose waste, or even find innovative ways to extract metals from the ground.
That sounds like a very ambitious project, but something that obviously is with all of the changes that we've heard today on all of this investment in the future. It's something that obviously that data piece is something that we'll continue to discuss as we go through. In your terms, Marco, you've got a little bit of time left. I'm not going to be too much of a bully when it comes to time here. That data piece, when we're talking about the information piece, it's not just about the rock, is it?
Absolutely not. I think that when you say ambitious, I think it is ambitious, but a lot of the moving parts of that ambitious project are already in existence. I think that it's all about bringing those various moving parts together. That's the ambition part. And the technology we have, and it's growing, and this afternoon we're going to have a great opportunity to showcase what is already available. So the technology is there, the know-how is there. We have made a tremendous advancement in the past few decades. Here, the ambition and the real transformation aspect of our center here is bringing that together and focusing on those boundaries where the magic happens. If you think about really where discipline come across, that's where new ideas are developed, new ways of looking at problems are really forged. So that's how we're going to plan to do it. It's not about creating everything from zero. A lot is there, but together with industry, government, and academia, we have the chance to bring it all together.
We've talked a lot about those boundaries. You and I have had lots of conversations about those boundaries, and we've talked about them between industries, we've talked about them between applied and fundamental research, we've talked about them between industry and academia.
Exactly.
Those boundaries, you keep saying, that's where the magic happens.
But that's where
the driving force.
Action happens.
And that's why we have a centre. That's why we bring those together. Thank you, Marco. That was beautifully on time. I appreciate it. I'd like to turn now to Kerry Turnock. I'd like to introduce, as we go, Kerry. Kerry is a partner investigator for the Centre in Critical Resources for the Future, representing BHP. As a global practice lead resource knowledge, that's a long title, Kerry, at BHP's Resource Centre of Excellence, Kerry oversees the characterisation of rock masses throughout a deposit's whole life cycle. With 30 years of experience across geoscience operations and technology disciplines, she's a proven track record in delivering breakthrough projects that improve mining practices. We've had some great discussions, Kerry. It was absolutely fascinating to chat with you earlier in the preparation for this panel. You had some really clear thoughts about mining outcomes and a lot of passion there. And we're looking at chasing those mining outcomes in terms of people in this discussion. If I could paraphrase you, you raised this notion that the world's increasing reliance and chase of ESG targets is something that is going to drive, continue to drive an increase in mining, not slow down. We're just going to see the consumptions of minerals will just not slow down. You posited that we really should be mining not just rock, but knowledge about the rock mass, and you had a little bit more to say about that this morning. So the current measure, and I think we're working on what Marco's just said, the current measure that we're talking about is metres drilled in a rock or in a mass. Perhaps that should be how much information can we squeeze out of this hole you talked about. And by embedding our future geoscientists at the centre with this information, we can build knowledge banks and a fertile environment for this approach, for them to flourish in this way. Can you explain how you think this data-driven approach, given what Marco has just said, can strengthen those vulnerable areas in our workforce and make better geoscientists for the future? It's a big question.
Absolutely. It's actually a couple of questions rolled into one, so we'll break them down. But it all starts with context. And the context is for us to have the environmental, social and government requirements that we need to meet in the future, we have to start preparing for them today. So what is it that we need to know today in terms of our data acquisition and our knowledge acquisition? Because it's our job in industry to connect what is in the earth, to connect the earth to business decisions. How do we connect those two things together and have full responsibility and accountability for every single thing that we touch? And that's not just the economic component, that's the non-economic component. And I'm going to use the terminology non-economic rather than waste, because when we think about waste, we're only thinking in one dimension. When we think about that rock mass in terms of our First Nations or traditional owners, it actually has spiritual value. It's not waste to them. It never has been, never will be. So we need to think about how rock mass changes its value in different dimensions over different time periods. And that starts with the acquisition of data. So it's really important as geoscientists, firstly, we acknowledge that we are the only discipline other than safety that touches every single part of our value chain, from exploration to evaluation, mining. It doesn't stop at the mine geologist. It goes into load and haul, it goes into drill and blast, it goes into processing, it goes into waste management, it goes into how our customers use it. Because any time they touch a mineral, a density, a metallurgical component, a morphological component, a chemical component, they are touching geoscience at the core. We are the custodians of that. We are the vanguards of value, and we are the stewards of risk when it comes to that geoscience knowledge. So it's up to us to make sure that we not only acquire it, but we acquire it for everything that we are disturbing. So not just the economic component where 99% of our time, effort and energy goes to, it also includes all of that waste material that we disturb, that non-economic component, whether it's in relation to how we're going to put it back through progressive closure, how we're going to extract further minerals from it in the future, or how we're going to repurpose it for something we haven't even ideated yet. Because geoscience is an investment, it's not a cost. So we need to change that mindset across our academic, our industry and our government perception. It's not a cost. Because once you've got that data, you have it. You don't lose it. Where we lose it is because we fail to propagate it across our value chain. So every time we go out and we do an activity, to your point about data acquisition, we want to squeeze as much out of the ground every single time we touch it, whether it's through sensing and sensor technology or physical. At the moment in industry, we measure our value by how many metres we've drilled. It's not good enough. It's got to be every time you put a hole in the ground, I want 10 times the amount of data out of it. I want 20 times the amount of data out of it. So data acquisition is really important.
So data acquisition is part of that that wish list for the future geoscientists.
Absolutely.
What do you imagine in a minute? What do you imagine the future geoscientists look like in that context?
So future geoscientists, I think we need to acknowledge that we need two broad categories of geoscientists. We need those who are the deep-seated SMEs, so really deep into the fundamental space, but we also need the generalists who are the applied geoscientists, and they're able to communicate effectively and efficiently so we can propagate our geoscience knowledge into every decision down across that value chain. So in that sense, this centre has the capability to support both the fundamental and the applied, which gives us the translation across the value chain, and we need to support them with those transdisciplinary skills.
I'll be interested to see Matthew's thoughts of that when we come through. Thank you very much, Kerry. I'd like to turn now to Dr. Sandra Occhipinti. Sandra, you lead the largest geoscience group uplifting mineral discovery rates. Quiet from the crowd. Is that easier to hear? Oh, hang on, I might just do a little bit of the technical visuals.
Well, did mine work?
Okay, well maybe you just give that to Sandy because I'm asking Sandy and Sandy's answer is yours working, Sandy? Yeah. That's all right. I'll just use my voice here, talk into the microphone. I'll just introduce Sandra before we start. Sandra is a partner investigator in the centre, the research director of the mineral resources at CSIRO, and the president of the Australian Geoscience Council. With 30 years of experience in government, industry and academia, she specialises in mineral system science and multi-scale interdisciplinary analysis. Sandy's work focuses on advancing mineral discovery and recovery to support the energy transition. She serves on several advisory committees and has worked extensively across Australia, Southeast Asia and the Americas. Is that better? Yep, great. Okay, great. Sandra, we talked about the flow of information and how increasing the flow of information to future geoscientists allows them to become better team members. I think that's critical in a number of ways, mostly due to their ability to be able to see up and down that value supply chain. In particular, centres like this one are really good at achieving this because they break down that constructed kind of dichotomy that we talked about, the applied versus fundamental. And you mentioned to me earlier that you don't think that centres should have these silos because of the way that all the partners are involved. How do you think, from your background at CSIRO, how do you think with their scope across such a large group this will help the centre achieve that breakdown?
Yeah, so opportunities, just like Kerry said, are really, the opportunities are at the intersections between what we traditionally call different disciplines, right? So if you look across the value chain, what it really is that there are different disciplines that are focused across the value chain. So even though geoscience touches the whole value chain, you may not have geoscientists embedded in your processing plant, right? Even though they're playing around with minerals and extracting metals from minerals, for example. Now at CSIRO, we have been focusing on those connections across the value chain for decades, essentially. I can't say that we're doing an amazing job because it is very difficult. And we can bring that sort of connectivity into this centre. And the other thing that we have been quite focused on is really bridging that misconception, I think, between fundamental and applied research. Right now, I really dislike those silos. The reason why I dislike it is because if you're doing something down here and no one knows about it, then it's completely useless. Right, so you need to think about what the impact of that work is going to be down the track, and it might not be that it leads to something amazingly groundbreaking, but it often is quite valuable. That so centres like this have a great opportunity in so much as the connectivity of the people. So going back to what Marco was saying, the connectivity of people really does drive innovation. Right. So that's what we sort of focus on at CSIRO. So the team that I lead, we've got applied mathematicians, physicists, chemists, lots of geologists, okay, so lots of geoscientists. I won't say with really high level expertise in one thing or another, because what we really want them to do is they have a favourite little hobby that they like maybe, but the idea is that we are working to solve one problem. And the one problem that we are trying to solve is how do you find stuff more easily that is of value, that will be of value. So, and how can we tell what that value is going to be at the first drill hole, or even before the drill hole, by the indicators that there might be something there. Right, so to try to save money, to lower our footprint, etc., etc. One thing that the Muditch mob talked about was the kangaroo and the emu always going forward. I spent a lot of time as a field geologist, so I was very well acquainted with kangaroos and emus, I have to say. I thought the kangaroos were very clever and the emus not so much, but they did always go forward, right? They never went backwards. And I think that this sort of centre is a way of looking forward. And that is also really important. And the reason why it's a way of looking forward is because it is going to be, even though focused around geoscience, really interdisciplinary and really thinking about, right from the beginning, the student over there connecting to somebody over here, thinking about, well, will this thing that I really love looking at, will we ever be able to extract these metals from these sorts of deposits? Now, I think that every time we reach something that might be called a roadblock, there's an opportunity there to work out how we can do it, because we'll be able to do everything eventually, right? So I was on a panel not so long ago and we talked about these sorts of roadblocks. If we think back to, say, when solar panels were invented in the early 1950s in the US, they worked out that well, first of all, everyone was really excited because it wasn't going to cost them anything anymore to power their homes, right? But then someone did the math. It was going to cost 1.5 million US a year to power a house with those solar panels. Now, most of us in this room probably have solar panels on our roofs now. we know it doesn't cost that much. In fact, eventually, you know, it actually saves money at the end of the day. That's what we should be looking at every time we look at a new rock, a new deposit, an opportunity. That's how we should be thinking. This will be of value in the future, even though if I did something with it today, it might cost me more, right? So if we look at that as well in terms of those terms, the other thing I don't like is the term waste.
Yep. Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Which is what Kerry also looked at, and that's something that we've been looking at CSIRO for some time as well. We think, if we think about the traditional look of the mining value chain, so you have exploration, then you have mining. You might sort your rocks that you mine, you process them, you take them off somewhere else, and you do something else with them. Usually, we just ship them off here, but we're looking at different ways of dealing with them in that respect as well. We shouldn't be looking at it like that. It's just one industry, and that industry can be as small or as large as we want to make it. And that really is where the opportunities are. So then if we look at what we traditionally call waste, so tailings, what is the opportunity for tailings? Is the opportunity to put solar panels on those flat areas and to power a community nearby? Is the opportunity to, if we understand what the mineralogy of the tailings are, is the opportunity to open up cottage industries for local communities to extract some other value out of those rocks, whatever that value might be. So what's the use there? So like Kerry, we think about now right from the beginning, what can we use all of this for? Can we sequester carbon into these areas? So we just need to, bring that along. And CSIRO, in terms of bringing some value into this centre, we're very excited to be a part of the centre. So thank you very much for asking us, Marco. We're very excited about it. We're really excited about helping to train the geoscientists of the future. The geoscientists of the future will be different to when I went through university. I didn't go to UWA like everybody else here, but I did go to Curtin for a little while, and I did work here for a little while, so I feel like I've got some credibility. But the geoscientists of the future, even if they specialise in something here, they're going to have to become generalists over there, or at least be able to listen to people that are. Because if we're going to understand all the data that Kerry was talking about, you need to be interested in it. So that's a big step. But you need to be able to understand where it came from, what it means, and what you can do with it into the future as well.
And I think Matthew will have some insight here, being at the intersection. If you don't mind me just turning to Matthew, you sit in an interesting corner here, obviously, if you wouldn't mind, both as a manager who's led teams and fields for many years, but also now you're a student, you've come back and you're doing an industry-led PhD here at the centre. You've come back to study a deposit that's moving from exploration to mining, and we heard a little bit about it earlier. I'd just like to introduce Matthew, who's a PhD candidate in this centre. His research focuses on understanding mantle conditions during the formulation of nickel-copper PGE deposits, which has significant implications for sustainable mining practices. And with 14 years of experience in mining exploration, Matthew was actually involved in the discovery of the Savannah North nickel-copper deposit and the Gonaville PGE copper-nickel discovery as well. Matthew, in our discussions you highlighted, and Steve's kind of given you a good introduction, the strengths that you would look for in a team are those hires that can understand how their knowledge can be transferred up and down that value chain. And we've talked about that bigger picture awareness. We've talked about, a geoscientist here understanding that there's going to be implications down the end of the line or prior, or what can we do, and creative thinking about that. I think this comes into play potentially with your experience with stakeholders as well. The nature of engagement that you have with your partners, you said, is extremely diverse, up and down, and each project would be diverse from project to project. Can you talk through some of the connections that will be part of the centre that will contribute to knowledge building for those geoscientists of the future in terms of understanding those relationships with stakeholders?
First, I'd just like to touch on that fact that I have come from industry back to this centre to complete a PhD. I think it was commonplace that geoscientists in industry used to be encouraged to do a bit of extra study or involved in research with researchers or stay up to date with academic research. And I do think in the last sort of 10 years or so that's slipped a little bit. So it's an absolute credit to this centre, the way that it's been set up with its values, the way that it is set up to look across that value chain, and that it is a training centre, that companies are interested in not just being involved in the centre, but they actually want to buck that trend and have employees involved in the research. I think that's fantastic. I know it's not just me. There's 3 of us, I think, in this cohort who are all coming from industry to do PhDs on behalf of our employers and the centre.
And those industries can see the value in that.
Absolutely. So more to your point on the relationships and collaborations across the centre. I mean, it's the way the centre is set up. It is a value chain centre. I remember having our conversation right at the beginning, setting up this project, and it was, well, what impacts or what value are you going to add to exploration? What impacts or value are you going to add to metallurgy and processing? What impacts and value are you going to add to non-economic ore or waste? How is this project going to contribute across that value chain? So it's at the absolute heart of setting up each of these research projects. And then actually collecting the data in those collaborations, relationships and connections. I mean, I'm collecting some data here at UWA, at the CMCA, but we've had the opportunity to go to UQ to do a very specific sulfur isotope study. We are working with BHP on the TEMA to collect some data early next year. We are working with AXT, another industry partner, to understand some specific questions, and also CSIRO. So you can see that the tools available here are fantastic. But that's just the tools. I mean, the knowledge base is something else. You've got experts in that whole value chain. So yes, there's the geologists and the metallurgists to be able to help answer your questions, but you can also reach out to mathematics, to data science, and to thermodynamics, whatever's going to help solve those issues that you're dealing with. So I guess I think that graduates from here, in the centre, and that geoscientist of the future will have collaboration at their heart. I don't think that's a skill you're born with. I don't think it's anything that can be taught, but it's something you become more comfortable with because you're exposed to it. And I think that having the centre set up like this really does expose you to all those collaborations, so that in our future careers we'll be more comfortable collaborating.
And reaching out
And
and
reaching
getting
out.
those answers and knowing that it's an option. Thank you so much. I think you answered those questions, yeah. Everyone, so, moving on to the slide. Sorry, we're having a technical issue. Can you hear me still? No.
Sorry.
Better? Can you hear me now? Right. I will continue to shout, but our panellists' answers are more important than mine, so we'll forge on. Nicole, thank you for sitting there so patiently. We've looked at expanding awareness now across that value chain. We've looked at knowledge as the asset, knowledge as the asset in concert with the minerals. So, you know, as important as the minerals themselves. And we've looked at some important contributions that can come from our industry and science partners, and the awareness that our geoscientists are going to have as they go through this process. Just like to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Nicole Rook, who's the chair of the board for the Centre in Critical Resources for the Future. Thank you, Nicole. She's also served as the Chief Executive Officer and the Chief Financial Officer of the Minerals Resources Institute of WA. Research Institute, thank you, since November 2018, following 15 years at the Chamber of Minerals and Energy in Western Australia, where she coordinated industry input on government, regulatory and policy issues. When we've talked previously, Nicole, one factor that you've mentioned to me is time. Time's one of those critical assets. We want those geoscientists to understand timeframes from industry and that they also, as a result, understand those commodity pressures in the market. Can you elaborate on that a little bit further?
Sure, and I think that's a real challenge for any research is to, and Sandy touched on it, is actually what happens with that knowledge that's generated. How is it used and who is it used by? And so often there's quite a disconnect between doing a PhD, a 3.5-year PhD, and the time frame within which industry want information. And I think one of the real challenges, but one of the really exciting opportunities for the team within the centre is to be able to look at those opportunities to be able to understand what are the drivers out in industry, what are the commodity markets, what are the cycles that happen out in industry as it relates to critical minerals, and be able to anticipate what is it that industry is going to need to be able to help them de-risk their projects going forward. And it's through that de-risking that we then get to create that scale and opportunity, not just in Western Australia, which I'm very parochial about, but also nationally as well, along the entire supply chain. Like Sandy, I also heard with the introduction by the Muditch team about moving forward, and key in the name of the centre is transformation, and so it's about understanding what is it that industry is going to need to be able to transform, and how do we preempt that and deliver that to industry. And not just have the focus on it being publications, and so that's where there's some incongruencies between the boundaries of what happens between industry and the research community and what the different drivers are. So I think there's some real opportunity for the centre to be able to look at how do we break that paradigm, how do we still get the publications that the academics and researchers want, but how do we actually deploy that information, whether it's in the form of data, whether it's in the form of new knowledge, to be able to make that transformation happen. And the other thing that I really liked by the acknowledgement to country was, it was the Muditch mob. And Muditch, I learned a new word today, being great and strong. And so equally, I think that's a great preemptive for what the centre is trying to be in terms of great in building the great mob of researchers and geoscientists that we're going to need going forward.
Mm-hmm. I think I love coming back to that Muditch word. It's been used a long time in obviously in Noongar culture and in centres. I've seen it previously. That we're going to create this incredible strength, and we can already see some of the directions that we're going to be heading in. Going back to the geoscientist, going back to that person and the people of the future, how can we use? This is a very specific, more technical question. How can we leverage data analytics, remote sensing, these kinds of modelling advancements in geoscience education to create that awareness up and down of that value supply chain? These are specific technology things.
Well, I think that's an incredibly emerging space, and there's lots of really exciting opportunities about not just use of data, but also the information that's contained in the whole legacy of research reports and reports that sit in the various geological surveys. And how do we harness the increasing capability of artificial intelligence to be able to find those insights that we don't have the capability to do ourselves? And I think there is a whole world of work that's happening out there being able to understand ways and mechanisms specific to domain-specific areas like geoscience in what the utilisation of that data can be, how we can utilise AI, and certainly that's one of our particular passions in the centre, is how do we not just work with, how do we not just have individual research projects, but working with Marco and Wei, who's here, about how do we create a data platform to be able to integrate the information that's generated within each individual project so that we can then harness the collective efforts that are happening as opposed to just looking at it as a singular research project. And that's something that's certainly a particular passion, and to do a plug for the GSWA Open Day tomorrow as well is something that I'll be talking further on, is about what that future with AI is and how do we make that an exciting opportunity, because that's what's going to engage with the 14, 15, 16-year-olds who want to get into, who don't want to do the dry science but are really excited by gamification and are really excited about what the new technology is, and they're going to be the future geoscientists that we're going to need to be coming in to the pipeline now, so that in 10 years' time, we've got another we've made a step change in how we do things.
That's going to be interesting to see those 15-year-olds who are all into gamification going out in the field. We talked about earlier about actually getting those, out of the office and, out of the office and onto field, and so that they can see what that whole process looks like. That would be fantastic. Marco, we're just coming to the end of our panel session here. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about in terms of that? Is there anything you'd like to wrap up with before we go to the Q&A session?
I just would like to emphasize once again that this is the culmination of a really large collaborative effort, and it's fantastic. I mean, we talked, collaboration has been a bit of a buzzword here, and I think that if there was one thing to emphasize is that all of us across academia, government and industry, we have been working together to build this ever since the first discussions we had a few years ago. So I'm really honored to be here, and I'm actually willing to open for Q&A.
There you go. Well, big congratulations to you all, and big congratulations to the centre. Thank you very much for our panel. It's your opportunity now to ask those questions, those burning questions. Natasha, are you going to microphones? I guess anyone who would like to ask a question. Oh wow, already ready to go. We've got some questions ready to go. If you don't mind just announcing who you would like to answer your question as well before you start. Hands up.
Hello, my name's Holly. I'm from Uni Adelaide. My background is in geology. Thanks so much. Awesome panel. I reckon this might go to perhaps Kerry, but I'm just thinking about like geoscientists for the future. It's interesting hearing comments about waste and where geologists are in the value chain, and we sort of stick to geology and then it becomes a mine and then we create waste, but we're talking about waste being actually a pretty reckless term. So I suppose with geological perspectives for the future, it's almost like we need a new way of thinking about what ore is or what value is right at the beginning of exploration before it becomes like a tailings problem. So I suppose what new geological perspectives do we need to embed in future geologists so that we can address those downstream waste challenges, because I think that's at the heart of what constitutes ore.
Yep. So in response to that, Holly, there's a couple of things. Economic is a changing construct. What's economic one day is different another day, and it goes back to Sandy's point. As geoscientists, it's our role and our responsibility and accountability to quantify what's in the ground. So it's the total rock mass. Yes, we're looking for an anomaly, so we're looking for concentrations of things that are going to be economic. Otherwise, we'll try and define the whole world. And quite frankly, as a geoscientist, I'd love that, but it's not really practical. So what we need to be thinking about as we approach something for its potential economic state is to think more broadly about what is going to be the life cycle if it becomes economic. Therefore, what's the other information that I need to capture with it? How do I define the size of that ore body? And how do I get really sharp about data acquisition earlier, more effectively, and cheaper? Because if we're going to think about it in its total life cycle, we want to characterise the total rock mass. We want to get that waste information. We want better structural models to support geotechnical decisions. We want to understand the mineralogy as it passes through the value chain. In terms of areas where I think we can grow around some of our geoscience approaches, particularly in that non-economic or the waste, tailings, those sorts of places, one of the things that always strikes me that we think that material is static. We think it doesn't change. And as a metamorphic petrologist, getting really close to my happy place, you take tailings and you sit it in an acid of a pH of 2. Anybody thinks that there is going to be no change in that mineralogy over 100 years, 200 years, 500 years, is kidding themselves. Absolutely kidding themselves. When you bring the rocks from the Pilbara that are 2.3 billion years old, it still staggers me, 2.3 billion years old, and you expose them to oxygen for the first time in 2.3 billion years, they're going to change. So we need to also think as geoscientists, how do the processes that we're applying that are indirect, the ones that are not taking the economic minerals out, how is it still changing the disturbed land mass and those disturbed rock masses, and how do we deal with it? Because quite often that's at the crux of the clash and the interface on the social side. That's where we get acid mine drainage. That's where we get chemical seepage into waterways. That's where we disturb a fault that allows mobile elements to move into a ground aquifer and contaminate a ground aquifer. So as geoscientists, we're the ones that are able to capture that information, provide it and allow it to propagate forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's also interesting because it's almost like as geology, we wait for people to tell us what's valuable. We wait for people to say what the product, what the end product of our geology is, and we then go and find that. There's an interesting world where the geologist sets the tone for what value is. It's a bit of it could be a cool paradigm shift.
It is, and I think one of the things in this centre, and this is part of training geoscientists for the future, we've fundamentally mined out the large, at-surface, homogeneous ore bodies. To think we're going to find another Newman, to think we're going to find even another Olympic dam that are in the same construct as what they are is really challenging. You know, we've been across the earth. We might find some places like Ecuador that's underexplored or something like that, but those really large homogeneous ore bodies, they're gone. And what we're now mining is lower grade, deeper, more complex ore bodies than we've ever dealt with before. And when you just move from open cut to underground, you have to front end load your geoscience like no tomorrow, because in open cut we learn as we go. When you're underground, you have to know it all before you start predominantly. And we're pushing the frontiers of our science, technology, engineering and mathematic capability with underground. We're looking at underground block caves that are 1.2 metres as a block cave at 3 kilometres. I don't know about you, but I'm even got sweaty palms thinking about it, about our engineering and our geoscience to geotechnical interface. And that's where the conversation around in situ extraction starts to become relevant. At what point do you change your methodologies? And therefore, at what point do you change how our geoscientists need to acquire and need to quantify that geoscience so we make safe, productive and economic decisions, not just for today, but for tomorrow as well.
Can I chime in on that one? So I think that one of the ways of looking at it is of a total resource. So the total resource that we often think about is just the resource of the particular metal or whatever we're interested in. But there is a total earth resource that we are disturbing. This goes back to Indigenous culture as well, where Indigenous people understand that there is a total earth resource. If you take something, you put something back, all that kind of thing. So in Kerry's example there of the rock caving, one of those resources is water. Now really water is our most precious resource. It's way more precious than any metal, because without it we can't sustain life. Now when you go to block caving at 3 kilometres depth or 1 kilometre depth or whatever you want, if you go to mining in any way, at any depth, you go to ISRU, in situ recovery utilisation, you are disturbing water tables. And so as a geoscientist, we're aware of these things, and we are aware of, if you do this over here, it's going to affect this little piece over here, and why it's going to affect it, because we understand about porosity, permeability, faults, all that kind of stuff. I think the problem with mineral resources in general in the past is perhaps, I'd worked in industry for a while, and my job, I tell people, was all care, no responsibility, really, because I was one of the experts in the company, so I didn't feel responsible. But the thing is that I had a job and I would do my job, and then it would go to someone else. So one of the things we really need for the geoscience professional of the future is to have connectivity, right? So not just to think, oh, that might happen over there, but really kind of understand as things move, what is happening, and then going back again, going, well, remember we can't do this because of these things, or remember we can do that because of these things. So there's that sort of piece as well. So it's a total earth resource we're looking at, and we're sort of custodians of that, but we've not been very good with our custodianship, and that's partly because of the way businesses are set up and the way that, you know, our societies are set up. We kind of live in natural sort of silos in a way, so it's cross-cutting those.
I think, Natasha, we've got time for one more question. Just, pardon? One more, yep. A very quick one.
Mick Wilson, I'm the Executive Director of Bella Vista Resources. We're one of the, I guess, business partners involved in all this, so I'll just give a bit of perspective from junior land. So obviously in Western Australia we have a lot of junior companies out there looking for the next big one, and as has been discussed today, it's a big challenge. All these things cost money, drill rigs cost money, and so it's that, I guess, ability to create groups within groups that can attract risk dollars and bring that money into the industry so that we can actually deliver on finding these deposits. Now, that challenge has sort of emerged in the last few years. I'm going to say in my career, when I came out, it was the 90s, there was a recession, companies weren't employing geologists. So there's this horrible sort of disconnect between longevity of careers, access to capital, and that ability to get beyond the ultimate prize, which is finding new deposits. So I guess what you guys are doing is fantastic, but it's bringing that combination of the economics is really important, and that ability to deliver value to the shareholders and the risk takers that are actually giving you the money.
I'll just quickly make a comment on it. That's one of my particular passions, is making sure that the outputs and what the centre produces is a value add to the companies who are participants, to help them when they go out and do funding and financing, to be able to understand what it is that companies like yours need, so that when you're out there, you're not pointing to a highly technical report, you've actually got the information that you need that's generated from this research that fundamentally supports the case for investment, whether it be green investment, and increasingly all the funding and finances are requiring people to demonstrate ESG credentials. So it's how does the centre, my ambition for the centre is how does it help support you go out and get that money through the research that it does, so that we can get those projects happening and underway.
Thanks, Nicole. I'd like to thank everybody who's sat here and given us such great information. Kerry, Matthew, Sandra, Nicole and Marco, thank you very much.